Hey all, 118 Seth Shadow here. It's that time again, as we are 1 month away from our next set. We're going to be taking a look at the pricing range for set 5, Omens Eternal for Shadowverse Evolve, in what I am now calling the Shadowverse Evolve budget. Previously, this was known as How Much is Shadowverse Evolve, where I'll be going over individual decks for each craft, and talking about the prices of individual cards as well as overall pricing, my opinions on it, and just how much it takes to build decks given the set's new support. So with that, let's go ahead and get into it. First, just covering a few things. So, first thing is the price color key. Every single deck I'm going to be showing you will have pricing for individual cards, and they'll be listed as green or red. If the price is in green, that means I think the price is good for the rarity of the card, whereas if the price is in red, I think it's high for that rarity. All prices are based off of TCGplayer.com's market prices as of recording, and in addition, it only covers the main price. The whole pricing, it will be for the main deck only. It does not include any leader cards or any tokens that you'd want to pick up. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start taking a look. And the first thing we're going to be looking at today is going to be Umamusume. Umamusume did not get any new cards with set 5, and it won't be getting any new cards for any future sets, but one thing that did change about it is that the restriction on Trial Initiation and Iconodictus has been lifted. So now you can play 3 copies of each of these cards in the main deck, which brings the deck back up to full power for set 5. Though despite that, the deck itself is overall a little weaker than considering some of the other decks in this format, but it's still a solid choice to consider. In addition, now that the restrictions have been lifted, it enables players to more comfortably play the spell card 7 more centimeters. While that's not a game-winning card, it's certainly a game changer, which can really set back your opponent's setup, removing a good portion of their board as well as cards in their hand. But the main concept of this deck is that it still runs under the same win condition of Daiwa Scarlet with vodka to pump up with power on all of your followers, and then utilizing spells in the same turn to keep on raising their power, and then Daiwa Scarlet will give followers Storm to swing in for a lot of damage. There's also Ogre Cap, which serves as another win condition of the deck, where the card can just race with multiple carrots, end up with lots of power, and it does a board wipe as well. But in terms of expense, most of the deck has gotten significantly cheaper over time, overall bringing the final cost of the deck to $168.28. This deck used to be over $200 to pick up, and that was with the restriction in place. So without the restriction, and the fact that there's just been a decrease in popularity of Umamusume, it's easier to get into this deck, but it's still pretty high cost. But decks, the cards, like Daiwa Scarlet and Ogre Cap, which are some of the bigger win conditions of the deck, are among the cheapest of the high rarities to pick up in here. It's $357 to pick up Daiwa Scarlet and $682 to pick up Ogre Cap. The big cost of this whole deck is an Agnes Tachyon, where its base legendary is ridiculously high at $34.77, whereas the Evo is also the second most expensive card in this whole deck set at $11.65, which is still good for a legendary, but the base one is just way too high and what really drives the price here. Ultimately, still a pretty solid deck, and almost everything else you can pick up in here is under $1, with only a few exceptions like Rice Shower, but overall still a pretty solid pick for the time being. And then for Havencraft, this is where we're going to start talking about the new Omens series that comes out with set 5. These are specific units, and there are 2 of them per craft, or there might just be 1 in some cases, and there's also 1 that's used as a neutral. In terms of pricing of this deck, or I guess I can talk a little bit about how this deck functions, it's control, which is all about getting to Aegis and hitting for a lot of damage in the late game. But the thing that also differentiates the deck is the addition of Marwyn, the Omen of Repose. This is a very unique card where its special ability allows it to Evo for no cost, but it allows your opponent to take 2 turns in a row after Evoing. And so that makes it pretty unique, but to make up for that, it gives you a lot of things. A draw, some life, and then its power rate, it also gives you an empty play point. And in addition, it doubles its power from 4 to 8, and it also gets ward and aura, making it very difficult to get rid of. This is why the condition to evolve it is skipping your turn, given that you can play it at 4 points and just immediately have an 8/8 on the board that can't be targeted. That gives your opponent the chance to finish you off in 2 turns unless you ward it, where your opponent is just going to have to hit it with at least 8 damage, otherwise it's going to do a heaping helping of damage in the next turns. Ultimately, some of the more expensive cards to pick up in here are not the Havencraft cards, but the neutrals. Bellringer Angel has been dropping off in value since we've been talking about all these different decks, and now it's 1050. That's still high for a gold rare, but ultimately still better than the $15 to $20 range this card has usually been at. One that's still a little questionable is Acolyte's Light, where I didn't mark this one in red, but $564 is the current price on this one. And now that we have 2 additional copies available for Glory Finder, you might actually want to consider that as red as well. Heavenly Aegis is in the $5 range too, so not too difficult to pick up. And the only other red that I've got here is Gillenese, the Omen of Craving. This can be used as a whole engine in any deck, which enables for unit destruction as well as drain, which gives you the ability to recover a lot of life that you might have lost. The engine there is Gillenese herself, a spell that features her called Craving Splendor, which is right next to her, and then you've got Apostle of Craving, which is the wolf that's up here. The wolf is 36 cents, and then it also has an Evo, which is currently 213. Craving Splendor is 34 cents, while Gillenese herself is 14.59. You have units that make their return, of course, like Jeanne d'Arc. Cudgel is also in here, and you also have a few other new cards like the Saviors, which is both a search tool for Marwyn as well as a way to banish cards. You also have Lyriel Arch Her Throne, which is an anti-burn card that can be played in most decks, as it's also a neutral card. Ultimately, the final cost of this deck is around $138.81. Then the next deck we're going to talk about is the cheapest one that we're going to be going over today, which is Abysscraft Sanguine. With the addition of set 5, we got Valnish, the Omen of Lust, who has a very interesting ability where if you're in Sanguine, you'll get Storm, and if your life is 7, it also gets a bonus of power, which is, it's just interesting that it requires you to have 7 life exactly. A little odd, but is what it is. The card is only $3.21 to pick up, doesn't have an Evo, and it's the most expensive card in the whole deck, which makes sense given that it is the Omen of the deck. Everything else is pretty cheap, like Demonium Punk Devil, which I've talked about on Market Watch a few times. The price I'm showing you here is not for the gold that comes out of set 3, but the promo that you got from the shop challenge. $1.80 to pick that up. And then a lot of other cards that are new here include the Disciple of Lust, which is only 69 cents, Wings of Lust, 29 cents, and then Lyriel is also in here. We also have the return of Righteous Devil, and ultimately, the whole premise of this deck is doing lots and lots of ping damage, which is done to yourself as well as your opponent, and just try to hit them really fast with lots of bits of damage and finish them off early game wherever you can. The final cost of this deck, as I said, it's probably the cheapest that we're going to see for a while on this game, 3176. So not only is it under 100, it's under $50 to build, which is very rare for this game. The next deck we're going to be talking about is Dragoncraft, which still maintains its discard engine, so you could play this in a variety of different ways, but the big addition to the deck is the use of its own Disdain Omen engine. This has some interesting increases for certain cards. The first thing I want to talk about is Disciple of Disdain, which is a silver, and it's $1.38, which is still not bad for a silver card, but it's unusual to see a silver, especially one that is craft specific, go above $1 under any circumstance. The gold card, Disdainful Rendering, which is a spell for the whole Disdain engine, is cheaper than this silver at 72 cents. You still have Dragonsong Flute in the deck at $9.37, and Forte is currently $11.40. Although the last time I talked about this card, this had been very short on quantities on the market, so you do have to watch out for that one especially. Galmix, which is the prime omen of the whole deck, is $12.37. And then you've also got Rika Kashimoto in this deck, which is, I guess you might want to consider it red, but you could just consider it green since it's still under $14.50, but it's $14.32, so it's almost breaking $15. Dragon Oracle, which is still exclusive to the trial deck, is $7.31, which has been going up for some time, but it also has a reprint in Glory Finder, although it'll be hard to find Glory Finder reprints on the market in general. The other thing I really want to talk about, though, is the increase in price of Draknir Knuckle Dragon, particularly the Evo, which has shot up to a price of $11, which is high, definitely high for a gold rare. But ultimately, besides that, a lot of the other cards are modestly priced with only a few cheap ones. Dragon in general has very rarely been a cheap deck to build, outside of building something more like pure PDK. This variant is worth $179.04. Then the next deck we're going to be talking about is Lishiana Runecraft, the Omen of Destruction. And this is probably the first time that I've ever seen any build that does not have a shred of red in it in Runecraft. Because normally you'll have Agnes Tachyon in most builds, and then Merlin has always been above 15 for quite some time, but Merlin has dropped off a little bit to $13.42, so still not cheap, but certainly not ridiculously expensive. And Lishiana, which is the main unit of the whole deck, is $3.09 to pick up. This deck specifically uses the Omen of Truth on top of the Omen of Destruction, who is Rao, but that is a specific and limited tech, and it's only 81 cents to pick up for the regular legendary, whereas the Evo of this card is $1.04. Merlin's Evo is also $5.44, and aside from that, the deck's expenses are really cheap. It also plays the gingerbread engine, which gives you lots of life with concentration, which is just below it. Concentration will also allow you to draw 2 cards with the gingerbread house. Then it's just a matter of what spells you like to play, as well as the different techs you want to go with. Demon Flame Mage is in here, which is also a starter deck exclusive at 96 cents for the regular and 18 cents for the Evo. And then an alternate win condition of the deck is Saphira, which is also a new card that came out from set 5, which hits like a truck depending on how many followers are in your drop zone. But this deck's final cost is pretty modest at $82.95, so more of a middle of the road, if anything else. After Runecraft, we go into a very popular deck of this format, which is Usurpation Thieves, Swordcraft. Swordcraft got Octress and the whole Thief engine, where the way the deck works is milling your opponent's deck as much as possible to gain power and also to steal cards from your opponent's drop. So, between the Servant of Usurpation, the Disciple of Usurpation, as well as Usurping Spineblade, and even, you've also got the you basically play the entire Usurpation Omen engine in this deck, because they all force 1 or 2 mills on play or on swing for Octress to just steal something out of your opponent's cemetery and use it as your own. In addition, this particular variant plays the Craving engine on top of that, and of course we know the Craving engine has Gillenese almost at $15, and then Gemstaff Commander is here to pick up specific cards that you might want to use later, like Albert is a tech in here, you've got Leonidas as well, and Alexander is also a good tech, which is 366 versus Alvin, which is 490. Leonidas himself is still a really nice cornerstone of the whole deck, giving you the capability to just swing very massive once you get his amulet on the board. Ultimately, pricing of a lot of the cards, Octress is the second most expensive in terms of its base form at $12.55, and the Evo is currently $8.74. The final cost of the deck is $138.29, so one of the more expensive ones to build out of this set. And the last deck to go over today is going to be Forestcraft, where this still plays the Elephant win condition along with the utilization of Silverbolt, but it also includes the new Puppet engine, which, if you played the original Shadowverse, you'll know that puppets came from Portalcraft. The concept of puppets is that they hit the board and then they're supposed to be used for just chipping away at followers. And then when you use Noah allows you to just hit the opponent's face with slightly buffed up puppets and win the game with all that power. Thankfully, compared to the version from the original, Noah himself does not have Storm like he did in the original, but he's also a 5 cost compared to a 9 cost in the original game. Noah himself is only 31 cents and is a new alternate win con of the deck, so basically you have 3 different win cons that you can go through between Noah, Elephant, and Silverbolt, or just outright push with power with cards like Ancient Elf and even Flower Doll or Tia by just spreading across the board with a lot of units. Bellringer is in here too, and otherwise there isn't very much that's expensive in the deck. Tia is still $8.46, but for a legendary that's a pretty fair price. Ancient Elf has dropped off recently to $3.41, and then Cassiopeia is also $3.51, whereas all the win cons are golds or silvers and are pretty cheap. Elephant is still 69 cents, its Evo is $1.39 and you only need 1 copy. And then Silverbolt is also really cheap unless you want to go for the Showdown promo. For the final cost of this deck, it's $75.93, so another middle of the road to pick up. And with that, let's take a quick look at the overall summary of the cost of each of the different crafts. So if you're looking to build decks that are going to be cheaper for this format, Abysscraft is definitely the way to go when it comes to Sanguine. If you want to do hand control, it's going to be a little more expensive and more middle of the road. Dragoncraft really depends. If you're going pure disdain, then you might be able to consolidate a little bit of cost, but ultimately Forte is still played, so it keeps the overall cost of the deck up. And then Galnix herself is also one of the more expensive cards to pick up from the set. Swordcraft is also going to stay relatively expensive, simply because Octress is also one of the most expensive decks. But if you don't play the Craving engine, you could substantially decrease the cost. Forestcraft and Runecraft don't have too many changes overall. even if you do go with some alterations of the deck, because Merlin is what really drives the cost for Runecraft. And then the general engine for Forestcraft is just what keeps the deck's price up. If anything, Bellringer's removal would probably help the most. Umamusume, there's really nothing to change on that one if you're playing Die with Scarlet, because the main core is what drives the cost there. And Havencraft, of course. The Omen of Repose is a more expensive deck, and you still have Egghaven Alice, which really doesn't have that many changes outside of the use of the new tomb, which gives you some additional burn damage. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like, please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys later.